but a safe and welcoming space. We are looking forward to seeing the street improvement project become a reality to reduce traffic speeds, create safe crosswalks, enhance walkability with shaded sidewalks, and provided needed parking, street parking. Having a slower traffic pattern and a welcoming tree-lined block will hopefully attract more visitors to the neighborhood. On behalf of Spy Hop and the thousands of young people we will be serving at the new center and Central 9th, I hope you will all approve amending your budget to include the streetscape and undergrounding on 900 South. Thank you.
Okay, are there any other general comments for the RDA board? I don't see any, so we will move on to the public hearing for the RDA budget amendment number 4. Do I have anyone who would like to speak to that? Do we need to close this and take action later? What are we doing on this?
Close and refer action later in the meeting.
So I'm looking for a motion.
Madam Chair, I move that we close that public hearing and defer action to a future meeting.
Second.
Or later in this meeting, either way.
Defer action to a future moment in time.
The motion is to close the public hearing and defer action to a future moment in time. And I think that Andrew seconded it. I'm sorry. So that was a motion by Board Member Mendenhall, a second by Board Member Johnston. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that will be closed and we will talk about it later. So we're moving on to RDA business. I am looking for a motion to approve the meeting minutes of Tuesday, March 26th, 2019.
Second.
I have a motion by Vice Chair Wharton, a second by Board Member Mendenhall. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes as well. Now let's get on to the meat of things, we will start with the Central 9th Streetscape improvements and undergrounding follow-up. And if I can have Ben and Danny and Court and Jonathan here with us today. Jonathan, is that JP? Shit, what?
Yeah, I think he's gonna.
Like, I'm
gonna hang
only
back.
gonna
You're
call
gonna
you
join us.
Jonathan now, JP.
I have to admit, even when you say it, I'm like, who's Jonathan? John Larson's coming? What? So, welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you. Madam Chair, this is the follow-up briefing on this topic. At the March 26th briefing, the board discussed the original vision for the neighborhood, the intent to encourage small local businesses, an improved pedestrian environment, calming vehicle traffic, and transit-oriented development. The board also discussed the potential consolidation of 10 projects across 3 departments. That would be community and neighborhoods, the RDA, and public utilities into one large coordinated 900 South corridor project. The board also discussed creating a working group on creating a city policy for undergrounding power lines and the possibility to salvage traffic signals instead of completely replacing them to decrease the overall project costs. Up on the big screen, you will see a memo which is also attached to your packet from the administration dated April 10th. It provides an update on the chart of the 10 projects showing the existing funding gaps, and the current status of those designs. The plan is discussed as hiring a consultant team, and this would decrease the workload on the city's existing staff, while the city's employees would act as project managers over that consultant team. The funding gaps are noted as $1 million for the 9-line trail center section. This already received $4.8 million from the county and the transportation choice grants, but that was $1 million less than requested, so that's a funding gap that would need to be looked at. There are also funding gaps for the streetscape improvements, which is part of the budget amendment before you, as well as the undergrounding. Those total $1.3 million. There are also a couple caveats on the public utilities projects, specifically that some of them are listed as to be determined because it's still too early in the design phases to have more refined cost estimates. And there is also a note that some of these projects may need to be designed in a closely coordinated rather than a consolidated manner, which means you may have separate consultants working on these projects that would then be closely coordinated by the city employees, but not necessarily one shared unified consultant team. The memo also mentions the possibility of additional utility costs, but we won't know that until we get further into the construction designs. There are several policy questions for the board to consider on the consolidation. If the board would like additional information or if you have specific questions on this updated chart of the 10 projects. If the board would like periodic updates as the consolidated project moves forward if you choose to go down that route. And what potential funding sources could be used to fill the funding gap, particularly that $1 million for the center section of the 9 line. And the last question is, 900 South was identified by engineering as one of the potential arterials to be rebuilt with the streets reconstruction bond financing. It was originally listed as 2025, and going down the consolidated project route would require shifting that up to be one of the first projects that would be reconstructed with the bond. And so the question is, what other street would move down that list? There's a second section of the staff report about parking and maintenance, but I figured we would start with the consolidated discussion first.
Great. Yes, please.
Ben, can you walk us through the alternative funding streams? I'm looking at, I'm assuming that's the chart that spans pages 3 to 4 under the 1.3 million additional funding request section.
Sorry. In the staff report or?
Staff report.
I feel like I'm looking at a different staff report. Oh, are you in the budget amendment staff report?
I'm in the Central 9th Power Line undergrounding and streetscape improvements staff report. Should I be in a different one?
No, I think you're in the right one. I just don't see it in front of me.
The pages aren't numbered on the document I have, so I could be. So it's the section under the parking meter location table. And then it's, and if you want me to look at a different table, but it's.
I think it's the, Ben, I think it's the section of your staff report from before.
Oh,
So if you scroll down to the black. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and
Yep.
redirect me if there's a different table you want us to look at. This is the table for me that says project area fund, name of project, program, proposed additional funding. Yep, that's it. Is this the one that you want us? No, actually, I'm
no,
sorry.
that's not it.
No,
That's block 70.
The different staff report. It is the Central 9th staff report, Ben. It's just if you scroll down to
Yeah.
the material from today's meeting.
It's the one with today's date on it.
It looks like it was saved in the wrong folder, so I just have to find the other folder.
Well, if it's too difficult, we can talk about it without looking at it, too. I just wanted to walk through some of those possible revenue streams and see if there's any discussion about them.
So tell me if this is it.
Looking good. Yeah,
Nope.
I think you passed it.
Back up.
Next one up.
Oop.
Yep.
Yep, that's it.
So this $100,000 is part of the budget amendment number 4 request, and it is $756,000 in total from program income fund and the remaining tax increment from the West Temple Gateway. So this is the amount that you could approve today, and it's part of the overall funding shortfall for the project. And it's also $560,000 for the power line undergrounding, and it's split evenly, $280,000 using the tax increment from the expired project area and $280,000 from the program income fund. Those two, or all of those together, is $1.3 million, and that would fully fund, based on current designs, the streetscape improvements and the undergrounding.
And Ben, is this proposal from the administration?
Correct.
I appreciate the creative approach to filling 1.3, and I am supportive of this approach, and I'd like to hear if my peers have any other thoughts about it.
So I think, thank you, Erin. I think one of the things that we need to do, and I appreciate you for starting this out, is there's sort of, we've talked about the 9th Central Streetscape quite a bit, and in kind of discussing with RDA staff what they needed from us, there were 3 things that we kind of came up with. The first being to discuss exactly whether or not we wanted to allocate this in budget amendment number 4, which is later on in our agenda. So this would be allocating this money to this project. Of course, that doesn't necessarily mean we're spending it on anything yet, but simply allocating it so that we know that it's there for this project. And please, RDA staff, jump up, or Ben, if I'm saying anything wrong.
I would
which
just
I've done before.
I would just add, Madam Chair, the last update I heard is the project is at 40% construction design, and that this additional funding would allow to bring that to 70 or 80%.
Is that
the
right,
latest?
Court?
Yeah, so we're currently at 50% design, and in order to really kind of get a real accurate bid and estimate, we would need to complete the drawings and then want to return to you with that final figure.
Okay. So I think that's like sort of task number 1 for us as a board for this particular project, which, again, we're addressing budget amendment number 4. It's just more of having that discussion of if we're kind of all in support of allocating that with budget amendment number 4. And then the second one is we were kind of, as Ben was getting to, was whether or not we wanted to have the RDA continue this as a standalone project or do the consolidated project idea with all of the other departments, as was on the table that Ben created earlier. And we do have half of the city here. So if we have questions regarding the consolidation, we kind of opted to sort of do a city council / RDA board meeting all in one on this project, on this particular item, simply because there wasn't enough room on the city council agenda to talk about it here and there. So we're kind of acting with both hats right now, which thank you to the city administration for having everyone here to have this discussion. So, and then number 3 is the maintenance option, and whether we want to decide on a maintenance option now or sort of wait to see how it all is going with the consolidated plan and then have a maintenance discussion at that time. So it's kind of where we kind of I saw this plan, this discussion going, so I appreciate you for kicking it off, Erin. And maybe what we could do is just, if there's no other discussion on that budget amendment number 4 item, sort of do a straw poll of whether or not we are in favor, or if anybody needs more information on that at this time.
Madam Chair, in
Yes.
favor of the consolidated plan?
Nope, allocating just this 1.3 million or whatever it is that is being asked for in budget amendment 4, that we will vote on again later, but kind of getting support of whether people are getting an idea of whether people are in support of allocating that money at this time.
Yeah.
Erin, did you have something? So is that a decent straw poll? Does that everybody understand what I'm talking about?
Well, Madam Chair, if I might.
Yes, please.
I think they're tied in my head. I'm hesitant to go ahead with allocating the money without a firm idea about how to do the maintenance. If we get to 70%, then we anticipate some percentage of cost increase, because there's going to be a cost increase to get to 80 and 100%.
I mean, there could be. Honestly, there has been every time we've come back to you, much to my chagrin.
It just, we know that's going to happen. I mean, it's part of the
Yeah.
business, right?
Yeah, and this is our best number that we have now.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm supportive of it, but in me, it's tied into, are we willing to do what we've done before and just allocate, but not have that discussion or have a firm plan for the maintenance ongoing? I personally in favor of having that discussion and making a plan for the maintenance if we're going to allocate the money for this project.
Okay, I think one of my ideas, if I may, is that I think if we, for me, sort of if we list those in 1, 2, and 3, number 2 which is the consolidated, sort of whether we want this as a standalone project or a consolidated project, sort of informs number 3 in some ways as well. If it's a standalone, if we as a board decide, you know what, we're not going to do any consolidated projects and we're going to move forward as we've done it kind of in this standalone, then you're absolutely, in my mind, then you're absolutely right that we need to decide on that maintenance right now. However, in my opinion, if we decide as a board that we want to move this forward with the consolidation of the rest of the departments, I think there's a different maintenance discussion that may happen once we kind of get the rest of the city. We're kind of at this part right here, this 50%. The city kind of, the rest of the departments need to catch up with us, and at that time, that maintenance and that allocation may look different, and those options may also look different, in my mind. And I mean, if RDA wants to speak to that after Charlie.
So a question on that, Madam Chair. So if we were to allocate the 1.3 million and it comes back that maintenance is going to be, substantially higher, would we then be stuck with the 1.3 million that we've already allocated, and then have to figure out how to fund that? Because that's one of the things that I'm a little bit concerned with. I think so as far as I love the consolidated plan idea, because I think that there are things, especially on Central 9th with the 9 line and, some of the other systems that aren't necessarily part of what the RDA is doing. And so, with that, I think it's fully appropriate to have the City General Fund, be a part of that. As far as the maintenance piece, and this is where, if you can help me, I just don't want to do something where we as an RDA board make an appropriation or a commitment to this certain project on, what things are going to look like with the $1.3 million, and then have to, back fund that with the general fund money. I would feel much better if there was, if we were closer to having some sort of an agreement with property owners, on doing an SAA or some other sort of a funding system, so that it's not just the city funding these pieces. So, as far as, I just worry that if we go ahead and approve the 1.3 million now, we're stuck with whatever ends up happening. And from what Court just said, we know that the maintenance costs are going to increase because that's just what happens. And I think moving forward with the consolidated piece would make I'd be much more comfortable with that before we were to allocate 1.3 million, and then see what happens with the consolidated discussion. And if the costs come down, or if there are costs that that could legitimately be shared, that would influence that $1.3 million, I would feel much more comfortable with that approach.
Danny?
Yeah, I would add, and I think maybe we're mixing up some of the projects and the control that the board would have on both the board and the city council side. As far as approving budget amendment 4 and setting aside that 1.3, what that really does is that essentially adds that 1.3 to what is already budgeted, which is already sitting in a holding account, which is already subjective to the board's approval of whatever that project is. And so you're adding that 1.3 million with the caveat and whatever contingencies you'd like to add to it in terms of what we have to return to you with in order to release those funds. And I think that ranges everywhere from the determination of, are we doing a consolidated project, to what information you may want to help guide the conversation for the maintenance discussion. And a big part of determining that maintenance discussion is just authorizing us to go and follow through and carry the design forward a little bit more, because it's only then that we really have a sense of what we're going to be able to build, what we will be able to afford to build, how we may or may not reduce or increase the scope, and then from there we can get you better numbers on what that maintenance is, and then have that conversation of what options exist for how you may or may not want to fund that maintenance. So the important thing to start with is just setting aside the funds so that we know that you at least are recognizing that we're going to do a project, and we have funds that we can at least start moving forward with the design. If that design is a standalone design, if that design is part of the consolidated project, we can determine that as part of this straw poll as well. But regardless, we're going to come back to you with a project, with the scope, and you can add the contingency that you're not going to release any of those funds or do anything until we have also addressed what that maintenance is going to be. So I think we can add that to the provision, but at least if we set those funds aside, then we have authority to start getting that better information for you. Right now, we're dealing off of 40 or 50% numbers, and that's the extent that we can provide you right now.
So Danny, did you say that we've already set this aside and now we just need to?
No, the 1.3 is in addition to the funds you've already set aside that are sitting there for the larger project as a whole.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
And-
And I appreciate that. Now, I will say it's a little bit different from, the concept that, we just heard that we would be. Here's what I don't want to do. I don't want to, as a board, to paint ourselves into a corner where we end up approving something without having a full idea of what the maintenance cost is going to be, and then, lock ourselves into something that we're going to have to pay for that, upgraded maintenance regardless. Now, what you said is different from what that corner painting thing is. And I just want to know which it is. So, if we straw poll this, you still have to come back with to create a maintenance plan, to do everything else. We're not locked into something. If that what we're funding in the $1.3 million, if it doesn't pan out, or if the cost is much higher, we can still revisit that. Is that right? Is that your understanding as well?
Yeah. And I apologize if I explained that in a corner painting sort of way.
You didn't. The corner painting was I am just very,
Yeah.
But it was with the idea that that the board could put contingencies on releasing this money. It was simply allocating it so that, and in part, I think it shows some good faith that we want this project to go forward, but that there would be more discussions. And I think I saw Kristen back there nodding her head, that I think, and if any of the city people want to raise their hand and come up here and talk, but that there would be a coordinated effort in designing that whole stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And if I'm wrong, come up and tell me that. But I don't know that I
So-
can go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, Charlie.
Go
Go
ahead.
ahead. You can finish, Charlie.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes me feel much better. I just want to make sure that before we pay for services or before we pay for a project, that we will have a maintenance plan in place, that we will know exactly what that is going to cost. Part of the problem that we've had in the past, and it's not with with under your leadership, Danny, but in the past we've funded a number of projects with no maintenance at all. And the Sugar House Plaza is one. The the S line is another. We continue to we fund these really cool projects that become extremely expensive to maintain, that ends up pulling from everything else in the general fund that's already stretched thin. So, Madam Chair, I would be okay if we were, to your point, if this is truly only to set the money aside. And that it is the intent, and the RDA staff understand that before they spend anything on a project or anything specific, that we have a maintenance plan in place. And the maintenance plan doesn't just mean, oh well, when the RDA goes away, that the general fund will take care of it. That to me is not a plan. And because I think what we need to look at is, if we have future discussion with the property owners in Central Ninth, and they're not interested in participating in some sort of an SAA, I think that should definitely determine what kind of a project we end up doing. And it's still going to be a better project than any other city street, even if it doesn't have the bells and whistles on it. But as long as voting for or straw polling decision to set the 1.3 million aside doesn't lock us into something and end up painting the general fund, I'll be okay with that.
And I would add, just as extra level of comfort, the reason we are here today and talking about maintenance for the past few meetings is because the bulk of the funds have been sitting there in a holding account with that contingency already in place, that the maintenance discussion has to be had and has to be figured out. So this is
So how is this different from what we've already done where it's sitting in that account?
This is different because we've started bringing that information. You guys have been giving us feedback as to what you may or may not want to consider for that maintenance, while at the same time we've been refining the design, updating those numbers. And in order to continue that process of designing this is where we're at now with the estimates. So we wanted to identify money within Budget Amendment 4 to make sure we had enough for the project, while at the same time recognizing that we're not going to get to spend that money or do this project until we have that maintenance conversation.
Okay. And one more thing, Madam Chair. I do want to thank you for your vision and leadership on the consolidation piece, because that is something that has not happened for decades. And I think that, having, all of the departments talking to each other is how not only future RDA projects should go, but every project that we're spending taxpayer money on. The fact that the departments have not traditionally communicated with each other, or that it has been as difficult to do, is crazy. And hopefully, because of your leadership on this, we'll be able to use this as a model and a template, not just with the RDA, but with the city overall. So thank you for pushing that and getting people talking to each other.
Yeah, thank you. I hear Charlie's concerns about the funding that we've executed in every department across the city over decades and decades without really having a thorough conversation about where the maintenance is going to come from. I can think of park strips on 7th East to all sorts of other capital investments that we've made that really we want to do as a city. They make the city a better place to live in, a better place to work and play. And yet we do need to have a reality about the maintenance costs. I think that which makes Charlie feel better about this discussion, about this not painting us into a corner, is exactly that which makes me uncomfortable about this discussion. We created a unique project area in Central 9th years and years ago, so long ago it's about to expire. And we have sold all of our properties, all but one,
Yes.
in that project area. And when Amy said we have half the city here, I thought you were talking about half the business, nonprofit, property owners that are here, because this thing's baked. We created a killer project area, thank you, Court, that was built with the community, that does something so unique in Salt Lake City in an area that needed it. And with like a lot of intention, we built a clientele, a resident population that's really specific. And here it is. They're sitting here in our midst today. They own property. They've been participating in these discussions. And so while I agree that we need a policy and we need a more systematic approach to attaching future maintenance, especially in RDA project areas that are going to expire and that, the general fund is looked at for that funding, but I'm sad that it's on the backs of these people in this incredible neighborhood that really is a success. This is an RDA success story. And if we burden this success story with the weight of an undone policy in this city to address maintenance at the same time we do capital, we can kill this success. This neighborhood can fail. And these amazing business owners and architects and nonprofits, they may have to leave. So if the policy discussion leads us to, we need to put in an SAA that is similar to the SAA we have in the Central Business District, these kind of businesses that we intentionally cultivated can't afford to do that. That's a hard thing for us to discuss and talk about, but that's a reality here. So of course, I'm supportive of us making these allocations to meet that 1.3 gap and get you through the 100% design work so we can have some solid numbers. I'm sad that it's taking us this long, but it's also awesome that we have an opportunity to consolidate with other departments from the city outside of the RDA. And in many ways, I think it makes a future transition of maintenance make a lot more sense, because we've got public utilities and parks and streets coming into this conversation where normally they may not in an RDA project area. I just don't want us to see all the work we've put in over 2 decades and hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars as an RDA taxpayers that we've intentionally invested in these people, in this community, slip away because of how long it's taken us to do all of this and the policy discussion that isn't this neighborhood's fault. So there's a balance. I get that this isn't a mutually exclusive conversation, but I want you to know that when I vote to support this 1.3 million, I'm going to be fighting all the way that we finish this project and we have this policy discussion. But we should not be sinking this project area because we haven't done that on our backs. I wasn't pointing at you, Charlie. I was just trying to make a point here and here. I'll leave it at that.
Councilmember or Board Member Johnston?
I'm supportive as well, but I do want the rider contingency on it to talk about maintenance. I don't know what that looks like, but if we're going to if the investment means higher property values and or tax revenue for retail or anything else in the general fund, that should be part of the discussion, right? The investment generates more. I think the details we need to hammer out, but I'll be supportive of the funding today with that contingency on it. Talk through maintenance.
Board Member Valdemoros?
Hi. So I like what Aaron said already, and I think this gives us an opportunity to have a more general maintenance discussion for all city projects from now on, because it's notorious that we have these awesome plans and certain improvements, and then they stay there and unmaintained, and then and then falling apart. So I really appreciate the work. I do like the idea of the consolidation. Gives us more direction, really, and hopefully saves us some more money. But I, again, share the concerns with Andrew and Charlie as well, that maintenance. How much? Who's in charge? How are we going to do this? So I will be supportive of this, but also really supportive, like Aaron said, on who's going to end up footing the bill for the maintenance in general for project in the city. So there you go. That's my 2 cents.
Go ahead, Charlie.
So I just want to say that I am it is not my interest or intent to undo what has been done. I fully appreciate the investment that the business owners and property owners have been making here. But at the same time, I think it's important that we also understand that for 2 decades, that all tax increment generated in this area has gone to this area. And if we are going to if we're going to talk about looking at what's being done on the backs of these folks, I don't think that's a fair assessment, because there are a lot of benefits coming directly from the investments that have already been made. Now, the other improvements and things that can be done, I think if maintenance is going to sink this project, that is a problem with the project. If something as minor as how to pay for something that you're putting in place is going to create an unsuccessful future, well, then maybe we ought to be looking at what the future is that we drew out. So while I fully understand and respect the property owners that have been there and have been benefiting from the tax increment for 2 decades that the rest of the city has not been seeing, I also want to look out for the residents throughout the rest of the city who we don't have the resources to fund streets. We don't have the resources to fund sidewalks. We don't have the resources to fund other street improvements. And you don't have the benefit of looking at what RDAs have, at keeping the investment or the increment in those areas. So, I take a little bit of umbrance with the assertion that we're doing, that by talking about maintenance and how to pay for future maintenance, instead of having all of Salt Lake City residents pay for the, project specifics in this area, that's going to sink the project. I don't think that's necessarily fair. It is in no way, undermining what any of you have done. But if we're going to build something, we need to figure out how to pay for it. And I don't think that's unreasonable.
Anyone else on the board? Aaron?
Wrap up to say, I agree with you, Charlie. We do need to figure out how to pay for things. And I think that if we go ahead with this second step with the consolidated, it sounds like there's a lot of support for the consolidation. It's a really unique situation for an RDA project area that's wrapping up to have these other city departments come in with some big investments to accomplish maybe more than the RDA thought to accomplish in the beginning on these streetscape improvements. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to have that funding discussion with the city in a way that is probably more relevant to those departments than other RDA project areas. So yes, let's talk about the funding. And yes, let's talk about approving a consolidated approach right now.
Chris, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to boldly agree with everything that has already been said. Oh,
Can you do it with a little more umph, however?
I would like to boldly agree with what has already been
you.
said. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, but I am excited about moving forward with the consolidation today.
Great. Is anybody else? Okay. I know that one of the concerns, and we talked about this the last time, but I'm sort of looking at our constituents and residents who are here, wanting to know what the heck is going to happen to their neighborhood, and I appreciate you being here, was the timing. And I know, and I see Jen in here somewhere, but that they were certainly, if we go forward as with this consolidated sort of plan, as we're calling it, that Jen and her team are adamantly, and if Jen wants to come speak to this, but we talked last time, adamantly trying to keep that time frame as much as possible. So I just kind of wanted to address that concern that this is an incredibly unique opportunity for us, and I appreciate what Charlie said, but this was all staff. This was all you guys and all of your work and putting your efforts together, and I truly appreciate it, because I think it can be a model for the way moving forward and being able to do better with our resources and be more efficient, which is what I think we're all trying to do. I think we all know that our departments are spread thin and everybody's working very, very diligently and quite amazingly. And I think this is the way that cities should be run, is that all the departments are working together. So I want to just say, as Charlie, thank you for giving me any sort of credit. I appreciate that, but it was all them. So thank you for that, and thank you for the board's support in moving forward, hopefully with this consolidated plan. What I'm hearing from concerns, and I want to make sure, is that if we allocate this money, that there would be contingencies placed, asking RDA board or RDA staff to come to the board when we get more final numbers about what that project will look like, how much that maintenance will be, and options for us to decide exactly how we're going to pay for that maintenance. Does that sound accurate as to what was heard from all the board members? Yes. I was going to say something else, but now I forgot. Do you need to clarify something, Andrew?
I think I agree with that. I think that the onus is on us, though. I think we need to bind ourselves to make that decision. They can bring us information, but I think from a body perspective, we can still take the information they bring us and say, well, we don't want to make a decision, let's just ignore it, or kick it down the line a little more. So my contingency was more for us to get the information and then make sure that we bind ourselves to make a decision on that.
I feel pretty bound by, but I agree with you.
I would, unless RDA staff needs to, or Ben wants to add anything, then I would love a straw poll.
I make a straw poll that we approve of the proposal for the 1.316 million that we will consider with a vote later in the budget amendment for part of our agenda.
All those in favor?
Yeah, right.
I wish you could. Unanimous with James being absent.
Should I just move on to a consolidated straw poll also?
I love that. Since you're on a roll.
I'll make a straw poll that we approve the consolidated plan proposal as suggested by RDA staff. Yeah,
And
Gina.
that is unanimous as well, so there's direction there. And what do you want to do with the third piece, with
Well,
this maintenance? I think
your
we
contingency-
contingency on that, I think addressed that.
And that would be part of your budget amendment motion. So
Right.
when you
Okay.
make the motion. on
So, yeah, as long as it's part of the budget amendment motion, I don't think we need to talk about it today.
Ever?
Today.
Okay.
Today. Today.
So later.
Okay. Is there anything else on this? Do you need anything else from us?
Don't need anything else from the board. I appreciate that and the direction. Just take a moment to thank all the city staff and apologize if RDA staff has been relentless in harassing them. But thank them very much for all the information that went into this memo and getting us to this point, and appreciate continuing to work with them and moving this forward.
Board Member Mendenhall had another question.
So assuming we do vote on budget amendment 4 and you get the 1.3 and you can go finalize the designs, right? Or get to 75%, 70% on the
Yeah,
design?
we would work with the transportation division and the engineering divisions to get a design. They're going to be working on a design for the whole corridor, and as a part of that, we're going to finish the design for the Central 9th portion. And it sounds like as a part of that process, we need to have a more thorough discussion about the maintenance, right?
And so I'm wondering when we might hear back about those updated designs and costs.
So, Madam Chair, I think Tom is probably the best person to speak to the time frame of the consolidated approach and his consultant on that.
Great.
We're going to send Jonathan off the table because he wouldn't stop talking.
Thank you for asking the question. Our proposed schedule would begin the consolidated design approach as soon as the budget amendment is approved to incorporate the funds that we're receiving from Salt Lake County with the fourth quarter funds. That will allow us to begin the consolidated design approach. And that's obviously the next budget amendment, not the one that's being
That's
heard
the city
right now.
council budget amendment.
Yes, that's correct. So our anticipated schedule, if that is approved, is to hopefully start with a design consultant doing all of the projects at once, or as many as we possibly can in that design approach beginning this summer, and then having the design finished within about a year so that we can make sure that any bids that we get back are the best prices that we can get, rather than waiting and waiting and waiting.
So I have a question. I know that it's probably a matter of weeks in difference, and maybe it's a question for Jennifer. Sometimes we can give a straw poll motion of intention to do an approval on something that's part of a budget amendment we aren't yet to. We do this sometime. We did it recently with the airport. And I wonder if that kind of motion could give your group the confidence or the security that you need to be able to move forward faster?
That's a good question. Really we can move forward with the RFP and with the advertising. We just can't move forward with any of the contracting once a consultant is selected until that budget amendment is approved. And so I think I would defer to our leadership on.
But I thought Tom's saying that they're actually waiting on the city council budget amendment to approve the incoming county dollars.
That's correct.
And your
That
the
also-
council is scheduled to vote on that tonight.
That's tonight. Hooray! Do you need a few hour heads up on
Yeah,
that?
I just wanted to be sure that
we'll
we
vote
were-
right now.
Yeah, that we were
Jeez.
differentiating between number 4 and number 5.
That's wonderful. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And one thing I just thought of since we were having this discussion, I just simply, as you're moving forward with the design, I mean, I would really encourage you to figure out a maintenance plan before
We know. Yeah.
coming to us with a design
Yes.
on the entire corridor. I just have a hunch that it might be a discussion amongst this group of people. So, just heads up.
And
Yeah,
Madam Chair,
that's our goal as well.
if I could just, I don't know, the email traffic is crazy on Tuesdays, so I don't know if council members have all seen it, but Ben emailed out earlier today some updated information from the RDA staff about what the administration is anticipating as sort of like the baseline costs for maintenance of the sort of baseline city plan for the 9-line trail, which I think helps inform sort of what would be expected typical city maintenance, and then that can help inform the future conversation too. So just drawing your attention to that email.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we good? We can move to the next agenda item? Whew, good work, everyone. Strong work, team. So our next agenda item is our budget amendment number 4. Danny, you can stay there. Ben, you can stay there. Court, you get to leave.
Yeah, I did.
Jen, you can stay here.
This is the second briefing, and the public hearing was held earlier in this meeting. The board can take action on any or all of the items in the budget amendment today. At the March 26th briefing, the board held a discussion about catalytic projects for the State Street and 9-line project areas, and an understanding that once negotiations and interlocal agreements with the other taxing entities are concluded, to hold a follow-up discussion about what those catalytic projects in those 2 new project areas could look like. The board also discussed multiple funding sources and a desire to coordinate funding on reconstructing 400 and or 500 West in the Granary District. There's $1.7 million in this budget amendment for reconstructing one of those streets. If approved, the $1.7 million would sit in a holding account until other funding sources are identified. The council also discussed potential maintenance mechanisms and a desire to have a general high-level policy for maintenance in the RDA, but allowing the flexibility for the maintenance to be tailored to each of the capital projects instead of having one detailed maintenance policy. The board also requested information on the 2016 Tiger Grant, and there are a couple of charts I'm going to show up on the screen that summarize. Originally, when the city, with UTA as the lead applicant, applied for Tiger funding, $28 million was requested from the federal government, and it was for 3 projects. $2 million for Folsom Trail, $400,000 for Lucy Avenue. This would be a ballpark track station improvement, as well as $4.5 million for the 300 North pedestrian overpass bridge. When the Tiger Grant was awarded, it was $20 million, $8 million less than originally requested. As a result, in addition to cost increases from inflation, the trade war, tariffs, the Lucy Avenue project was pulled. There are improvements being made at the Paxton crossing, so those pedestrian safety needs are being partially addressed in a separate way. Given the lower funding amount and the overall cost increases, the funding shifted a bit. This table is specific to the Folsom Trail as well as the separate but related City Creek daylighting project. If approved, there will be an additional $97,000 to the $2.2 million currently appropriated for the Folsom Trail. The City Creek daylighting is at a lower amount at $104,000, and it's a feasibility study. It's not the funding to fully daylight the creek, so there would likely be additional funding needs on that project. There are a couple policy questions on the Folsom Trail about if scope reductions are possible. As the design proceeds and as the City Creek daylighting feasibility study is finalized, that would better identify what the costs would be and if scope reductions would be needed within this existing budget. There are also questions about coordinating the Folsom Trail with other projects. When looking at a map of RDA project areas, the Folsom Trail connects the North Temple, Depot District, and North Temple Viaduct project areas. So it's an urban trail that uniquely connects 3 RDA project areas. It also touches 2 of the transit-oriented development station areas, the Salt Lake Central Station and the North Temple Station, that UTA's board recently selected for their TOD projects. And a briefing on those is tentatively scheduled for next month. And then there's also a question about next steps for the daylighting study. Staff isn't sure what the timeline is and what the details would be on that those deliverables. The other Tiger grant project is the 300 North pedestrian overpass, and it is $5.1 million total. Some of these funding contributions have not been secured but are currently in the works. This includes a $500,000 contribution from the Union Pacific and a $500,000 from UDOT in safety funds. The bridge is located at approximately 300 North and 500 West, and it would span 5 sets of railroad tracks. There are not currently concerns on scope reductions, but of course, the design as it proceeds could identify additional funding needs. Before I proceed, are there any questions on the Tiger Grant funding split?
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for walking us through that. I wonder, and perhaps it's rhetorical at this point, but I wonder about the experience we have to date with how these different types of improvements leverage other investments in areas. And daylighting is sort of a new thing for us, but not entirely new. Trails, we've had more experience with, and maybe it would be, I don't know if you have anything to reflect on that at the moment, but it might be interesting going forward when especially when we have to look at reductions for projects, and if we're trying to compare a trail to a playground, or I'm making things up obviously, but if we can have a better sense of how we've seen those kind of investments motivate other investments in the area, it would be really fascinating and helpful, I think, in these discussions.
I would just say from a staff level, there's a similarity with the Jordan River Parkway Bridge, which cobbled together, I think, 7 different funding sources before it was finally constructed. And the years it took to cobble those funding sources together definitely attracted a lot of attention, and I think also had a bearing on businesses and residents looking at if they wanted to move into the neighborhood or not. But I see some parallels in that project with this trail and this bridge.
Sure. Thank you, Councilmember Mendenhall. It's a good question. The Folsom Trail is interesting because there's 2 blocks between 8th and 10th West where it's really an economic development question. It's more than a park because the land there is right across the tracks from North Temple, and businesses are looking at redeveloping that. So it's more of an RDA kind of concept than actual trail, just those 2 sections. So I appreciate that question to bring back this discussion about the Folsom to that discussion. Question, Ben, the $500,000 from Union Pacific was intended, is that a good term? But wasn't signed? Where are we at in that process right now?
So the last I heard is there's a pledge, but there is not a written agreement at this time. And this actually follows the same funding contribution on the Jordan River Parkway, where there was a $500,000 pledge, and a year and some change later, it was in writing and the money was received.
If we allocate this funding to the Third North, or both actually, but is there any impetus for Union Pacific to follow through on a quick time frame to help us out, or where are we at with that? Is that going to hold up the project essentially?
So I think the administration could better speak to discussions with Union Pacific.
Yeah.
UTA is still finalizing their written agreements for the Tiger Grant funding, and I don't think they'd be ready to release the funding until later this year at the soonest.
And the clock doesn't start on that until?
There are some federal strings about obligating the funds, and the legal question of what satisfies the obligation, I would have to ask the attorney's office. But that obligation deadline is in September of this year.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
So, Aaron, what I'm hearing you say is that what we need to do is really look at if we put a friendship swing in a park, will it motivate people to talk? I'm sorry, I had to.
I was going to bring up friendship swings, actually.
And I will say it will not.
We're just at odds with each other today, Charlie. Maybe we need a friendship swing. Okay. Okay, Ben, you can continue if nobody has any further questions on this particular item.
So those were the updates to follow up on the board's request at March 26th. There are other items that were not discussed at March 26th if the board would like to continue going through, or if there are items you'd like to jump to. If not, there's the question of what votes to follow up on based on the 2 straw polls for 900 South, the consolidation and then the additional funding.
Are there, Jen, did you want to say something? Just take a deep breath as if you did. Board members, I'll leave it to you. Where do you want to go? Are there certain items you want to move on to within here, or do you want to just move forward with motions? I'm going to leave it up to you guys for right now.
I have can we get into the general policy questions section? So I am curious about the catalytic project ideas for the 9 Line and State Street project areas. Danny,
Can
do
you
you
tell
have?
me what page you're on? Sorry.
I'm on page 3 of 28 in the packet. So I'm in the staff report, black colored text.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's the 3rd policy question there.
Also on the big screen.
Thank you.
Is there a specific question you want me just to update on where we're at with the project area and kind of that process of how we came about with that allocation?
Well, this is a question about, you have a recommendation for a specific bond eligible project for State Street or 9 Line.
We have not gotten to that level of proposing projects.
We probably have some ideas, but
I am interested in hearing everyone's ideas because I think it's a very important discussion to have, both in terms of either what our larger priorities and strategies should be as we go into these project areas and what we should potentially focus on first in terms of timing and building increment and leveraging our funds to the maximum amount. So we have kind of purposely held off on having that conversation until we actually have the project areas set up. As a quick update on where we're at with those, we have a item later in the meeting that we can get into more detail, but just for the purposes of this conversation, we have, since we've approved the CRA plan for both those project areas, we have reached out to both the county and the school district and have initiated both of their processes for presenting the plan, starting the discussions, beginning negotiations for the interlocal agreements. Within the county, they have started us down that path of just telling us what information we need to provide. We're finalizing that and are about ready to submit that for presentation to their internal committee that reviews it and then ultimately makes a recommendation to the county council. With regard to the school district, they have indicated that they are very supportive of the 9 Line project as it is proposed and with the strategies and the goals. They did provide some input and comments in terms of what they would like the RDA to focus on. Those are just at a very high level in terms of housing, trying to encourage both housing that would support and be available for families and potentially increase the families coming into the city, or at least maintaining those options for families to stay in the city, as well as housing that is at a AMI level that is targeted towards what we would probably call workforce, but they're looking at in terms of wanting their teachers to be able to stay and live in the city. So those are 2 priorities that we are putting and incorporating into the specific interlocal agreement for 9 Line. For State Street, they are very supportive for State Street as it relates to the State Street corridor and the idea of how that is an arterial for the city, as well as the opportunities for development, and also because that is a significant impact and barrier for their schools and wanting to make sure that what we do in that area both supports and offsets whatever development happens there. They do have concerns with the size of State Street, and by size, I don't necessarily mean the number of acreage, because that is very similar to 9 Line, but specifically, they look at State Street in the area to the west that becomes more industrial. They do not necessarily know if that supports their goals as a school district. So when we had this conversation, it was very preliminary. We were not necessarily prepared to kind of come and talk the details of that. And so we asked them if we could come back with some options and some better talking points as to kind of the background and the history of how we got to where we are with the State Street project area. So that is our intended next step with the school district, is to sit down with them and talk through what are some options that can either get them to understand why we got to where we are with State Street, how it could align with what they're doing, and or are there other options for what we can do with the project area to make it work. So that one has been, has a few extra steps we've got to do before we take it to the level of negotiation.
Thanks for the update, Danny. Madam Chair, if I could just continue for a second, that we had some discussions along the very long process of creating the State Street project area about maybe having some preliminary conversations with the school district. And I'm not asking for a timeline on whether or not those happened at the time, but I think going forward, I would really like us to have a conversation about incorporating those two taxing entities into more of our development process, at least for updates along the way, meetings with our chair and our vice chair of the RDA as opportunities for their leadership to hear where we're at in our process, because this was a long time coming, and now we're experiencing a bit of a road bump on it, and I feel like in the future we could prevent that with more regular and frequent communication.
I appreciate that, and you're right. And we did involve them in terms of updating them on the process and the idea. And I think to your point is what we've also recognized is we probably need to have deeper conversations with them as we were developing that plan. We treated it as traditionally of just informing them and bringing them up to speed on where we're at. And what we've realized is we probably need to have deeper negotiations with them before we finalize the plan and have that approved so that we don't get into this situation. And that's simply an oversight on our part of traditionally as we've done project areas. Usually that has not been a problem, but where project areas are now created as that negotiation with our taxing entity partners, that negotiation probably needs to happen sooner than later. So you're absolutely right, and we recognize that our previous steps were just not providing enough detail for them to be fully engaged in those decisions as we were making them.
I appreciate you taking such an introspective approach on that, Danny, and we'll hold you to it.
You can always learn from your mistakes and do better the next time.
Madam Chair, I have other questions on that list, but I'm happy to wait if other people want to jump in from the general policy questions. Number 4, I am interested, particularly as we're having these discussions around operations, et cetera, and maintenance costs, in asking for a summary of all the ongoing funding obligations by project area and some suggestions based on those numbers about fund balance.
Yes, that is. This is an ongoing question we have with finance, and this has somewhat been a heightened issue as part of last year's budget, where we saw a significant drop in the CBD project area tax increment. And I think basically this splits into two different types of funding reserves and obligation reserves. And first, I'll cover our obligations, the bulk of which are our bonding obligations for the Eccles Theater, which span both the Block 70 project area as well as our CBD project area. And that is a question that is also in the staff report, and that is information that we hope to bring back to the board soon. Finance has prepared an update on what we feel is the potential shortfall for the debt service obligations. We are still in the process of reviewing that, and once we feel we have that, we want to come and present that to council staff and determine if that's something the board wants to see as an update as well. But that is the bulk of our financial obligations. I mean, that really is what drives a lot of what we are at risk for at any time in terms of what our increment would have to be obligated for. So we're going to understand that so that we can set aside the money for a reserve fund. You see that within BA4. You will see that within our next year's proposed budget, that we recognize that we need to start saving those funds up so that we are not impacted by that. As far as it relates to other obligations of the agency, those are primarily in the form of reimbursement agreements, which we have contractual obligations to make payments to the developers as they are paid for performance. Those are generally tied to the increment that is generated from their specific properties. So while it's an obligation to make a payment to them, the amount that we pay them is tied directly to what they ultimately generate. So it's not necessarily something that we're going to experience a shortfall on, but it is something that we have to pay them first before we pay ourselves. As far as our, are you okay? Yeah. As far as the other obligations or potential for reserve amounts that we need, those are probably more tied to our specific project area funds, and the bulk of those probably aren't a concern because the dollar amounts are not significant, with the exception of our Depot District project area and our CBD project area. And that is a conversation we're having with finance, which is what is the balance of what we may or may not want to maintain as just an agency general fund reserve, so that we always kind of have a little bit of cushion at the bottom, versus should we tie that into a stated policy of what we target, similar to what you have on the general fund? Ideally, the agency is a little bit different in how we structure those budgets, and because we generally have a pretty good surplus of funds, it's not always a concern, but I think from a policy and best practice standpoint, I think it's something that we should probably target and have a number that we at least try to make sure that we always can adjust for.
And check against.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and I know Jen's itching to say something. Yeah.
To kind of reiterate something Danny mentioned, which is that it's out of best practices and good financial management that the RDA is consulting with finance on this approach, and not state law requirements. So unlike the general fund, which there is a state law requirement that we have to have a minimum level of fund balance and actually a maximum level of fund balance, the RDA is not governed in the same way. But I think to Danny's point, there are certain funds that are going to have ongoing needs and people that need to be funded. And so it makes sense from a financial practice perspective to do that. So.
And if I can jump in, I think this policy question, I believe, Ben, sort of stems from the obligation on the CBD, right? Is that what you were talking about? That kind of.
The Eccles Theater, Regent Street, yep.
Right, and so having that fund balance there that we know we're going to eventually need to pay at some point when that dips down low. Next year? Oh, well, I'm not going to be chair.
Actually, it's a 2-year term.
Andrew?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. The policy question number 8, Danny.
Sorry, I haven't been able to
There
find
you go.
it yet.
Light
Yeah.
pole banners. I know it's a high cost priority. That's why it's number 8 on the list, right?
Yes.
We are not talking about the catalytic projects, and I think that's going to be a discussion to be had later on. I think on the 9-line project, particularly, this might come up because what might be the best tax increment generating concept may not actually have a lot of direct impact on the residents in the area, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of the way it's configured, there's a large amount of land south and west of most of that. So in my view, the light pole banners concept makes some more sense as far as cost effectively showing improvement, building morale for the project area and everything else. So I would like to see us pursue maybe some cost estimates there.
Okay.
I know the cost is really in putting up and taking them down, frankly, which seems strange to me, but and there's only one business that does it. Is that what I understand as well?
I don't know those details. I know when we talked in North Temple, my understanding coming in after the fact is the RDA paid for those light pole installations, and then it was responsibility of the community groups to pay for the banners themselves and that. And I think that's probably the difficulty, and why you're probably not seeing that actively happening is probably because the maintenance of it is either very specialized or just part of what anyone does.
Let's put a plug in. I think the groups could buy banners. I don't think that's been the issue. I think the issue has been access to and putting up and taking down. So not to bump this ahead of too many large pieces of this needs to be looked at.
Yeah.
But I think this could pay off in public goodwill pretty quickly for a pretty small financial incentive. So if we could.
I think we can certainly do that, and I think before Charlie chimes in, I think that's something we can definitely look at from a maintenance standpoint of providing options on how, if the RDA were to do a similar model of installing the hardware, who either would be responsible for the ongoing printing of the banners, installation, and coming up with options for that. Because
I think that's totally valid. I think there's a partnership to be had there. I think the major question is still going to be access to them and replacing. So if that could maybe be a discussion as part of this going forward, maybe some concepts.
We can certainly head that discussion. We can certainly do an allocation if you like with that plan attached to it of coming back with how that may or may not work and potential partners and options. A little bit out of our scope, but we can certainly take the lead on that and do that.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Danny.
Moving on to number 5, can we get an update on the 4.5 million housing in NOFA for areas of high opportunity?
I can give you a quick update and a preview. The quick update is we have not had anyone actually submit something that is viable to review and consider and present to the board. And then the preview is we are planning on presenting this next month as kind of an overall update, as well as some information as to why we think that may not have gotten the success that we would have liked to have seen, and then discuss options moving forward of what to do with that money.
But so we've gotten applications, but they're not viable. Is that what you said? Or
Yeah, we had one application submitted, and then as they went through and did some more work and actually tried to purchase the land, they could not make the project pencil. And we had one other party interested, but they never got to the point where they submitted an application.
And what's the marketing that we do for those funds? Is it?
Yeah, we did a small group. When we announced that both NOFAs at one time, we did a workshop and a presentation to all the developers and partners. We've done it on our website and Facebook. We put it on, out in the media. We did it on the Channel 2 News in the morning, Channel 4 News segment. So, yeah.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion.
Before you I feel like James would have wanted us to ask about the light pole banners, and Andrew's out.
Andrew asked.
Oh, he asked? I was talking to someone, sorry. I ignored.
I actually took a jab at Charlie, and he didn't even hear it, so I appreciate you distracting
Sorry.
him.
I do have another. Then I do have another question, but then on number 7, the expansion of the adaptive reuse grant program.
Mm-hmm. So this is something that we are proposing additional funding as part of our fiscal year 20 budget within the Granary District project area. We have had conversations as we've tried to identify opportunities for the North Temple project area of whether that would be a model or if it would be a slightly different model. It has been very successful. It's been successful in terms of accomplishing its purpose of really targeting adaptive reuse of buildings that have significant cost to it. It's something that we've talked about both within the scope of our existing loan program as well as a new program of just what an area like North Temple may need, what an area like 900 or 9 Line would need in terms of do we specialize them further based on that area, or do we just continue that model? We haven't finalized anything. We do have as part of our ongoing tracking that we are planning on coming back with a discussion on whether we want to look at changes to our loan program and guidelines and what that policy is. And that is somewhat being put on hold until we can incorporate what comes out of the housing working group and may do that. And I think at that time we would probably also look at are there variations or continuation of this program that we would want to incorporate in a larger area beyond just Granary.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion. I move that the board approve the budget amended as proposed, the budget amendment as proposed by the administration with the contingency that the administration return to the board with a proposed maintenance funding plan for the Central 9th Streetscape improvements, as well as an update on more final project costs.
Second. Okay, I have a motion by Vice Chair Wharton and a second by Council Member Mendenhall, or Board Member Mendenhall, excuse me. Is there any discussion, further discussion on this? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that passes with James and Andrew being absent from the vote. Okay. Phew.
Thank you very much.
That was a lot of money. Hello, 37 million. Sorry, we voted. James voted yes. Yeah, for you as well. Yeah. Okay, moving on. We have the Union Station Hotel loan for $7 million. And we will have Danny at the table. I just want to point out that we do have the developers from the Athens Group, Mark Sanford and Rob McIver, as well as Scott Howell here to answer any questions by board members that maybe, oh, hi, Cara. Cara's joining us too. It wasn't on
Kara's here.
on my list. That's okay. To answer any questions that staff maybe can't answer, although I trust that they can. So I'll just let you guys take it away.
Yeah, I'll just tee it up and turn it over to Kara here real fast and take a personal side of we are excited to be here today to talk about this project. for as long as I think I've been with the RDA, we've talked about options of how to activate and restore and adaptively reuse the UP depot, and that was a cornerstone of the original Gateway plan, and I think everyone thought that it probably could have been activated a little bit further, especially with regards to a public use. So we are excited at this opportunity and to have a group that is interested in doing it, and we feel has the financial capability and experience to do it. And so having said that, I think Kara's prepared to kind of go through some of the information in the packet and provide some information and answer any questions that you have. And as we get into any more details, as Chairperson Fowler said, the developers are here to speak to that and answer questions specifically to them in the project. So.
Great, thank you. So the board's considering today a loan for the Athens Group for a hotel project at the Gateway that includes the adaptive reuse of the Union Pacific Station building and then also the new construction of an adjacent guest room structure that's 8 stories. The site map here shows the project location with the blue shading. And just move on to the project overview. The concept is a boutique hotel that I mentioned includes the adaptive reuse of the Union Pacific building and the guest room structure. It will include between 210 and 225 guest rooms. And the ground floor of the Union Pacific Station building will be renovated and be a historic preservation project that will include a restaurant and public spaces on the ground floor and then signature hotel suites on the upper levels of the historic building. The cost of the project is around $80 million, and the developers anticipate breaking ground in early 2020 with a little less than 2 years for construction. This slide shows the financial overview of the project. The applicant anticipates attracting about 60% of the loan to cost from their senior lender, and then is also anticipating an equity commitment of around $25 million. And so the gap financing requested from the RDA is $7 million, which represents about 9% of the project cost. And then the loan terms that are proposed are for a loan amount of $7 million, an interest rate that starts with the U.S. Treasury 10-year yield curve rate, and then adds 300 basis points, which is our standard RDA loan policy. And then that interest rate is reduced by 3.5% to acknowledge 7 public benefits that are provided by the project. So the final interest rate is 1.89%. The term of the loan that's proposed is 12 years, and that includes 2 years during construction of interest being waived. Then the following 2 years after hotel opening and before the stabilization of the project, interest will accrue. And then the loan will begin the repayment period 4 years after the loan is closed. So that's 2 years after the hotel opening, and it will go on for 8 years. And then any remaining balance at the end of the 8 years will be repaid at that time. The collateral on the project is a subordinated interest in the developer's leasehold interest in the historic building and the future improvements. And the corporate guarantee is provided by the hotel venture to the RDA. I have some site plans and renderings, and I'd like the Athens group to present those because I think they can speak to the project better than I can in this case. So
Cara,
I'll
before
leave
we
that up
get
to you.
there,
Yeah.
I want to open up to questions to the board, just sort of about the loan terms and things like that, if there are questions before we actually kind of get to the site plans. So I'll open it up to the board for questions to Kara and Danny regarding the information that was presented just now. Andrew?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks Two questions. One is on the gap financing, 9%. Give me a sense of context for other projects and what's our window that we're comfortable with.
Yeah, I mean, traditionally, we'd prefer to be under 10%. We're very comfortable within the 10 to 20% range, and usually how we make that determination is just a function of what the scope of the project is, what the related gap is, as well as what we're getting in return for the public benefit. And so where this is right at or below 10%, we're pretty comfortable with just being an equity partner at that level.
Okay. The second question is about the collateral and guarantees. This sounds quite different. So help me understand.
It's a little bit different because it is a ground lease.
Yeah.
And so our collateral really will just be on the structures themselves, which I think there will still be significant value to cover that. The fact that they have over 30% of equity in that, and they're only going to be leveraged to 60%, provides us a lot of coverage with that percentage. And even with regard to what the coverage is for our dollar amount specifically. And then we will have a corporate guarantee, which is fairly significant.
Explain that to me exactly, the corporate guarantee.
It is limited specifically to the LLC, but that is a guarantee of that corporation to basically meet its obligations, and we will be right there with the first lender in terms of having that guarantee.
So the LLC you're talking about, not
Yes.
the... Okay.
Yeah. And if that's not correct, the developer can speak to it, but that's how we've discussed it. So, I mean, that's, as far as our loan program and underwriting criteria go, that's pretty much exactly what we would be looking for in this. And then there is, Carrie can speak to, as part of the primary lender, we will also piggyback on the completion/guarantee of the project as well, in whatever form that takes within that financing. And so we will have that added security.
Okay.
Chris,
Thank you.
did you have something?
Nope. Going to ask about that, and you covered it. Thank you.
Okay. Anna, did you have something?
I think it's kind of covered, but I think what some of the questions that I have, I mean, it's hefty. I
Anna,
mean,
will
it's-
you talk
sorry,
into your
it's
mic
gap,
more
but
than I love?
it's a hefty loan, and the risks that was one of the concerns when we were looking at this, the risks of this project not going through, because we've seen, in the past, things that we've lent to and they've been stalled for too many years, and
Yeah.
so I wanted to know a little bit more about that, how you're feeling about this project. Overall, it looks great,
Yep.
and it would be a great addition to the Gateway. I just want to know a little bit more to prevent similar issues that we've had in the past now and then moving forward in the future.
Yeah, we will, all of the standard protections we put in our documents for protecting us from that risk and security will be there. And I think your point is valid in terms of this is a much larger dollar amount than we look at for some of our other loans. And we will protect ourselves insofar as, obviously, we will not be doing any closing or dispersing any funds until they have their entire financial package ready to go. That generally also requires that they have gone through the design process and the permitting process, and everyone else that is invested in this project is, in terms of having a project that is ready to break ground, happen, and then we start putting our money in as the project happens. So we are exposed most within the construction period, which is a lot of the reason why we have that provision of no interest accruing at that time, because we want to make sure that we are not actually adding an additional burden of risk to the project. And so we recognize that, and we recognize that because of the dollar amount, we will follow this project. We will work closely with the developer as well as the primary lender to make sure that it is on track, that we have not put ourselves at, and overexposed our risk in terms of dispersing funds as it relates to the project. And then we will have all the standard protections we have within our loan documents and working with the city attorney's office. So dollar amount is a little bit higher, but all of the same rules and conditions apply, and we will make sure that we're securing that obligation.
Erin?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Danny, my questions are around the public benefits. I wanted to ask about the transit alternatives section. I see that its adjacency to the tracks is sort of a natural piece of anything in a TSA, so it's not necessarily about what the development's doing. I expected to see something about a green bike station or bikes available to clients or hotel guests rather. And I'm not seeing those kind of things. As we look at a multimodal transit approach in Salt Lake City, just being near tracks doesn't necessarily do that. So not necessarily for this loan today, but I would like us to get more detailed and maybe more stringent actually about what transit alternatives qualify as public benefits in, when we're doing a 9% loan on an $80 million project and it's transit is that it's next to the track station. That's not quite a public benefit necessarily. We've already built the track station, it's there.
Yeah.
So I think this isn't stringent enough. And I wondered what guarantee we have about the hotel's maintenance of a transit pass program for employees. Do we have in a
Right.
contract, is it in the loan agreement that they will not just create it but maintain it through the life of the loan?
Those are both great questions. I will start with the first one in terms of, I think exactly what you're talking about is what we are proposing as part of overall agency, looking at not only our public benefits, but really trying to tie those to measurable items that we can really come back and say this is specifically what we're getting and what the benefit is. And so I think you're right in that analysis, and that is something that we are trying to do for not just transit, but all of our public benefits so that we have a measuring stick by which we can kind of evaluate and compare across projects. With regard to the second point, the easy answer and the one is that we really haven't worked out those details as much as that is something that the developer has indicated that they would like to do, that they are exploring. And I think it's a valid point that if it was a concern of the board, that is something that we can make sure that as part of our loan documents, we are trying to tie that to something that is ongoing, at least insofar as our money is involved in that project, so that we make sure that as long as we're invested in that project, that they are providing something measurable that we get for that.
Exactly, because if we don't have a guarantee about that, and it's just that it's across the street from tracks, that's not bringing a new public benefit to us. And I'm gonna be supportive of this loan, but they feel weak to me.
Yeah.
I had one more on the public benefit question, which is under sustainability and the energy efficient design. I see the LEED Silver equivalent standards, and I definitely don't have a degree in hotel management, so maybe the applicant can help me learn more about this. But my understanding is that the design process doesn't, it puts certain mechanical factors in place, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the way that the hotel will be operated in other operations aspects that aren't necessarily insured in the infrastructure of the building will be energy efficient or sustainable. And we've all stated in hotels that are at different degrees of the green spectrum. So I know that there's a lot of different ways that can be managed.
You're right, and that's hard for us also to measure because there are many different ways, and LEED seems to be one of the easiest to latch on to identify, and I think that's probably an appropriate question for the developer to see if as part of their operations or their hotel flag or just their policy in general, how they approach that from an operating standpoint.
We'll get there in just a second, if that's okay.
Yeah, great.
Councilmember.
Thank you.
Did you have something? I just wanted to say before we ask the Athens group to come up, I certainly understand Board Member Mendenhall kind of looking at these public benefits and saying, can we define these more? But I really want to give a huge shout out to you guys for putting those in there and giving us sort of a written way to sort of to manage expectations for future developers and future people that come to us with projects, of saying this is why one person got a lower interest rate and this is why we're not doing it here. And Aaron, this is sort of to your point, sorry to interrupt, but that part of these public benefits is something that I think we've all seen in the small groups, but it keeps getting pulled from our agenda on the big RDA meeting because we tend to talk a lot. But it's the guiding framework and project evaluation that the RDA staff has come up with, where they have kind of said, here are all of these different boxes, and if you check these boxes, you get a benefit for that. Those are our incentives. But I really want to thank the RDA staff for putting that together and for making this process incredibly transparent, for really having a way for us as a board to look at something and say, oh, this makes sense. I mean, historic preservation of one of the most unique and amazing buildings that we have downtown is huge, right? Like for me personally, that's like the 0.05% decrease is great. I mean, it's great. And I think this allows us as a board to understand where our departments are coming from and to be able to be on board. So I think that there's obviously, as we have talked about with staff through our chair, vice chair meetings, certainly there are ways we can tweak that sort of guiding framework. And I know it's a work in progress, and sort of defining them a little bit more is definitely something that I think the staff is doing. But just getting it out there and putting it in our project areas and making this so that we can justify what we're doing and manage those expectations for future projects is really remarkable. And I think this just goes to show that you're listening to our concerns. Same with sort of our maintenance questions that we always come up with. I know that you're working on policies there as well. So I truly want to thank you for doing this hard work. I know that's taken all of last year and probably then some, but a lot of overtime. And this is the product that we get out of it. And this is exactly what we're looking for, I think, as we move forward in project areas and in these things. So thank you for that. And if there's nothing else on this area, part of it, I would like to have the Athens group come up, maybe walk through some of the design and see if we have any questions there. And if you don't mind just introducing yourself for the record, that's why you're here. Sure. I won't cross-examine you, maybe.
Madam Chair, council members, thank you very much for allowing us to be here today. My name is Rob McIver. I am the Chief Financial Officer and a principal in the Athens Group. We are very excited about the opportunity to redevelop and re-energize the historic train station. We think it's an amazing asset. We fell in love with it the minute we saw it, and you know, a number of great things have happened over the 2 years we've been involved so far to get us to where we are today. So these are complicated projects. They're expensive projects, and the RDA gap financing is a critical part. And just want to thank you for your consideration and your program. Thank the staff for all the great support and guidance they've given us along the way. And really appreciate being here in front of you today. And happy to answer any questions.
Hi, I'm Mark Sanford. I'm our Director of Development with the Athens Group. And I guess right now we'll do a quick kind of overview through the site plan and some of the renderings that we have, just to give you some context about the project. So here on the screen now you see a site overview, and you'll see the historic station running north to south there, directly across the street from the Vivint Smart Home Arena. The white curvilinear background is the 8-story guest room structure that's been referenced, where the building will attach to that on the first level. There are a couple of vacant retail spaces on the backside of the historic structure today, and we will attach the new guest room structure in those locations. This is a 225 room hotel. It's 210 to 225 rooms is the room count that's contemplated here. On the first level of that new guest room structure on the back side, you'll actually have public space, public meeting space, a little coffee shop is planned in there. I mean, we'll get into more detail and further into the slides on that. But just to give you kind of context, and this shows you where the new guest room structure is behind the historic structure, and where it attaches on the first level there. I think we can go to the next one. So this is it's a little difficult to see, but this is a first floor plan of not only the historic structure, but how the first floor of the guest room structure behind it is integrated into the building itself. You'll see the midpoint there. Sorry, maybe if we can. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, here.
Yep, so the middle area there in kind of that purplish gray is the Grand Hall, which I'm sure most of you are very familiar with. It's a magnificent structure, and there are a ton of possibilities there, and we look forward to re-enlivening that space, and it's very underutilized today, and it's a beautiful place that should be celebrated, and we want the public to see it more often. And so by having the hotel use at this project, we'll be able to reinvigorate, to create energy there, something that will draw the public. We want that to be a gathering place for hotel guests and the community alike, where there's a meshing there of the two groups. As mentioned in the memo that the staff prepared, we will also utilize the north and south wings of the historic structure. On the south wing here, you'll see that there's a specialty restaurant planned in to activate that former retail space. On the north end, the Depot, the Live Nation concert venue, will continue to operate. They will remain in place, and the vacant restaurant space on the first floor of that wing of the building will also be reintroduced as a restaurant, and will reopen and create further energy in that historic portion of the building. On the back side of this, or I guess the top portion of this, that's the new guest room structure you see on the back side. There's meeting space there on the right side, and on the left side you see a fitness area, a little bit more meeting space, and some back of house space. And here you see it. This is a perspective standing essentially on the steps of the arena across the street, looking back towards the structure. So you can see the new guest room structure on the back side of the property there. This is
Interrupt you, Mark?
Sure.
Can we go back to that slide? And can you please tell us about what will be on that second floor where those awesome big windows are going to be?
Of course. So at the south wing of the building, which is what's right there in the foreground, on the second and third level of that portion of the building, above the restaurant, you'll have specialty guest rooms that are built in there. That's a really magnificent space on the second and third level there. You have big ceilings, the beautiful exposed 110-year-old brick there. So we'll have specialty guest rooms in those portions of the building. And then in the midpoint of the building, under the Union Pacific sign there that you see, at the second level there's actually planned to be a specialty bar area in that location that will look back up Temple and towards the arena. So it'll be a way to re-enliven that space, so at night when you're coming out of a game, you'll see a lit up, active area there that's kind of a draw for the public to come in and enjoy this awesome building. So this is the perspective on the backside of the building from Olympic Plaza at the gateway. This is a close-up where you would walk up the steps from Olympic Plaza to enter into a courtyard area, and that's actually going to be on the next slide. So this is the courtyard area once you walk back through that. If you were standing in this courtyard and looked up, you see blue sky. So this is an open area. It's an area where the public will be able to come in and interact with not only the existing Gateway Center, but also to draw you into the historic structure as well. And there's planned to be a coffee shop there on the left in this photo, and then on the right side is where the meeting space will be. And so it'll be a great area that we are excited to re-enliven.
Great. I thank you both for being here and for meeting with me earlier today, and for Scott as well. I'm really looking forward to this project. I will open it up to questions to board members. Oh, sorry, I didn't see your light there, Vice Chair Wharton.
Yep.
Please.
So can you tell me a little bit more about how this will engage the Gateway? I mean, I don't want people to be like, oh, they found this really cute hotel and it's only several blocks from City Creek, and we can walk there for our shopping, or we can take the train. Like, how is this going to contribute to Gateway, as opposed to people just staying in the hotel or taking the train down to City Creek?
Yes, so first and foremost, we anticipate and need to be a center of activity for the community. The current trains, Grand Hall is open today from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. and you can pass through it. although it looks closed, even if you're, you know, as an active hotel, those hours will be vastly expanded. We anticipate having, you know, food and beverage offerings and gathering places and, you know, fun activities within the Grand Hall. It's meant to be flexible space that you know, can be used for different purposes along, you know, throughout the days and months and years. And ultimately, our goal is to create an upscale boutique hotel that provides a level of sophistication and fun and interactiveness that, you know, quite honestly, we believe is a hole in the lodging market in Salt Lake City today. We think the historic nature of the Union Station building gives us a great competitive advantage for long-term viability, and, you know, something that can't be replicated. And while we you know, respect and believe, you know, there's great competition here in Salt Lake City, we anticipate that we'll be, you know, kind of raising the bar a little bit in terms of how that.
Yeah, so that's another one of my questions, is that it's another hotel?
Yeah.
A lot of hotels coming in.
Yeah, we understand that, and that's been part of our underwriting process. It's part of, you know, kind of the risk-reward analysis that we do as developers and, you know, equity investors into projects. We are big believers in the future of Salt Lake City. We've been following it and watching it closely for a fairly lengthy period of time now, and we fully believe that we're developing a product that doesn't exist today, that's going to stand the test of time and will be a great return for the community as well as, you know, for our investors.
Yeah, that's interesting. Oh, go ahead.
No, please.
Why are you big believers in Salt Lake?
So.
We are cross-examining you, apparently.
I want to know why, you know, I'm checking the
That was his
genuineness.
lawyer voice, by the way.
I appreciate the question. I appreciate the question because we have a national, you know, scope of what we pursue and develop. And so we are constantly looking in different communities and for different opportunities. We got to know Salt Lake fairly well as we spent time developing the Montage Deer Valley up in Park City, and spent a lot of time coming through Salt Lake and interacting with some of, you know, the you know, Salt Lake you know, consultants and teams that we utilize. So we have followed the energy that's been created from the tech sector here, you know, the improvements that's going on in the Rio Grande district specifically. I mean, we got involved a couple of years ago. That was a big challenge in terms of bringing a hospitality use there. And we're big believers in what Vestar is doing to revitalize the Gateway Center, making it a fun, you know, atmosphere, re-tenanting some of the retail into creative office space. Kiln, if you haven't been in, is a very, very unique co-working space. And Recursion Pharmaceutical and some of the great things that they've been doing, you know, within the center have reinforced our thesis as we spent, you know, time working through the concept designs and getting through Planning Commission and historic landmarks. It's been a journey, and we're at a place now where it feels like all the things are lining up, and allows us to, and it's basically reinforced our original thesis in that, you know, Salt Lake City is an up-and-coming market that has great young employment and, you know, personnel. And I think from an employment base and from a technology base and from, you know, Goldman Sachs, you know, large office and those sort of things really have continued to, and it's getting more and more, I would say, institutional investor interest over the years as we see, whether it's apartments or office buildings or those sort of things. I think we're seeing a tremendous amount of investment within Salt Lake, and the infrastructure here that you guys built for the Olympics is fantastic, and So we've been watching it, and think this is, and been looking for an opportunity, and when Vestar came to us with this, we jumped at it.
I know Councilmember Mendenhall wants to say something, but before that, I just wanted to go back a little bit to activating Gateway. I had the opportunity to meet with Rob and Mark this morning or afternoon, sometime today, and Rob has known Vestar and been working with Vestar since the beginning, and so I think what I understood is they kind of were in collaboration of what that area needed, and to reactivate both Gateway and, in particular, the Union Pacific area and the old train station. So,
very true. And we've known Vestar for a long time. Ever since I started with the Athens Group more than 20 years ago, and my first office with the Athens Group was in Vestar's office. So we were very close and know each other very well. And I think that's allowed us to overcome some hurdles and structure something that makes sense and get us to a place where we are today. So I forgot your question, but.
Nope, there wasn't a question. I was just pointing out that you had been in collaboration with them.
Yes.
Councilmember Mendenhall?
I think it's wonderful that Athens Group is at the table with us. That brings, and your portfolio bring with it a great deal of thorough experience that I don't have a question about whether or not you know what you're getting into. I think you know what you're getting into. And let me tell you, lots of people believe in Salt Lake City's future. We have a vision for the future.
Clearly, someone did not get my tone different.
And I think that this is exactly what the Gateway area needs. I want to see businesses like Recursion stick around in this area, and that is going to take a whole creation of an industrial ecosystem to not just keep businesses like Recursion, but to keep the talent coming in and going out of those kind of businesses. So having a boutique hotel across the walkway from those kind of businesses is fantastic. I think Vestar's vision for redeveloping the Gateway the way that they are as a creative hub and having more unique businesses on the main floor is wonderful. So I think this is also, as our Madam Chair said, a fantastic way to see this historic structure lit up, really, and utilized in such a fun way. So I can't wait to sit in those big windows and look up North Temple and watch people come out of the Jazz game I didn't go to. Not that I wouldn't. So anyway, I'm excited that you're excited about it, and heck yes, let's do this.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. Anna?
I was going to make a motion, but
I'm ready to make a motion, but
Can I? Yes. Did you want to make a motion? I'm just kidding. Everybody wants to make a motion. Go ahead, Andrew.
Thank you. I echo the sentiments, and the turnaround of the Gateway is long needed, and I appreciate all your work and your experience. As a social worker and elected official, I feel qualified to critique buildings in general. There's things about it that I really like. I mean, the circular nature of it, the reuse of the old building, the jagged facade, it's interesting that way. Everything you said is right, except for you only see the historic building to the east now. And I know there's some limitations, and like I said, I'm eminently qualified to talk about that. But from looking at the picture, if you scroll down, I mean, I love the courtyard, et cetera, but if you scroll down to the west elevation, it's gone. I mean, the historic, the tie-in of the old clock tower, now the video wall tower, ties into the front of the old depot, right? But it's not there anymore, and that's, I guess, sort of my hope or question is there any sort of look at that piece? Because I'm just looking from my house perspective, from the west side of the city, it's gone. I mean, it's not there anymore. So help me understand a little bit the design process and sort of what you're thinking through there and kind of the trade-offs, I guess, that sort of thing.
So when we first engaged on the process, we looked at a number of different, kind of strategies as to how to, get to an economically viable project. And There was some earlier versions that we didn't drive, but were part of something that we took a look at that only ended up with an 140 range type of rooms. And it also was almost mirroring the historic building in terms of red brick and those sort of things. And as we collaborated with Historic Landmarks and talking through design, the issue was, hey, we want to make sure that the historic building, people can tell what's historic and what's not historic, and that the historic building can ultimately complement, or the new building can ultimately complement the historic building. So the reality of the building on the west side of the guest room structure on the west side is just the reality of getting guest rooms that ultimately to a place where it's economically viable. And I think we've done and getting through Landmarks, I think we spent a good amount of time with them, making sure, and there were some sacrifices made, and ultimately, on the structure, making sure that we preserved, the structure in the most in the best way possible. So I don't have a great answer for any option on the west side, other than I think what we come up with gives it breathing room. So when you're in the courtyard and you have the blue sky above you, you do have a perspective on the historic nature of it, and you'll catch glimpses of it when you're down in Olympic Plaza. But you're right. I mean, for the most part, the main view of the historic structure is still on 400 West.
And I like I said, there's trade-offs to these things. I understand that part. We just talked about the Folsom Trail corridor that links this to the rest of the valley, essentially, of going west to the neighborhoods. And I don't know if there is height restrictions. I don't know the other restrictions that were on what you have, because I know there's some height you left over from the building next door. But it's hard, I guess, in some way to see it sort of disappear.
And we were very careful not to exceed the height of the existing structure itself. So.
All right, I'm ready to make a motion unless Andrew has additional questions.
There's no chance.
I'm ready to second that motion if you'll make it.
There's no chance for design review at all?
Yeah, the ship has sailed.
Board Member Valdemoros.
Thank you so much. I'd like to make a motion. I move that the RDA board approves the Union Station Hotel loan request of $7 million with the provisions for repayment provided by the RDA staff report.
Second.
I have a motion by Board Member Valdemoros and a second by Board Member Luke. I'm not going to ask for discussion, so all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mark, you can expect a calendar invite. So it's 4 o'clock, and that's when we're supposed to start our council meeting. I do very quickly want to touch on item number 5, which is the project area creation priorities. And the reason for this is because this is important. There are a lot of project area ideas and some that are already pending. So I would like to go over that quickly. Maybe if we can take this down to about 10 minutes. So I'll let you take it away for now, Danny, but I may interrupt you.
Okay, just to not let Susan off the hook, I will ask her to come up because she is the author of the memo, and I think she should at least be prepared to answer any questions if we get into that. But in the interest of time, I'll go over it real fast and just set up why we're here talking about this. Obviously, the creation of project areas and the RDA involvement throughout the city is an ongoing conversation that we have throughout the year, and we get pulled in a lot of different directions. We last came to the board, I think, just a little over a year ago with this conversation. and propose some ideas for where we may or may not want to target our efforts in the future. At that time, the board gave us direction to focus primarily on finalizing and creating the 9 Line and State Street project areas. Also, over the past year, we have worked on the Block 67 project area and creation of that CRA. And so we thought it was time to come back and potentially open the discussion again to see if there's any direction that the board would like us to pursue and bring back in terms of additional information for looking at areas. Obviously, there have been conversations between the administration and the board as far as the Brickyard area and the potential of setting up a project area there. So I think that is something that we want to continue looking at. And then as staff, we have been engaged in conversations with partners at the University of Utah of looking at Research Park. And we as staff have also actively engaged and reached out to other city departments as it relates to potentially setting up project areas that are related to transit or transportation long-range goals and objectives. And then finally, we are also in the discussion as it relates to the fleet block and granary and what the potential future options may be for that. So within the memo, we've laid out a total of 13, 3 of which are already ongoing and in process. The other 10 are potential ideas, and for the sake of discussion, I'm happy to provide any more background information on what we as staff may or may not prioritize as we move forward, if that is the board's liking, or if the board has any that they are supportive of or adamantly opposed to. We would appreciate that direction as well. And our goal would simply be to try to get some kind of direction on if any of these you want us to come back and start having a deeper discussion on.
If I can start, if that's okay with board members, if the staff that you have right now, out of these, we'll say 10 projects, because 3 of them are already started, right? So I anticipate that there's already staff of some sort assigned to those 3 projects that are in progress. So of the other 10, how many would we be able to realistically look at doing?
Realistically, I think with looking at bringing on State Street and 9 Line, that probably puts it at our capacity as we are right now.
So are you asking for, in your budget, upcoming budget, will you be asking for more staff?
We have submitted that as part of our request to seek additional staff in the form of additional project managers and data, special projects research person, and that would probably be tied to if we were to look at growing more project areas. I think that would be helpful.
And if you were to receive everything you asked for, how many project areas of the 10 would we be able to look at? These sound funny questions, but I think it's realistic for us as board members to understand what high hopes we have. You know, we talk about maintaining expectations of our constituents and maintaining expectations of project developers. I think at this point we have to maintain the expectations of these people, these 7 people sitting up here.
Yeah,
right,
and I think that's a fair question. That's one we deal with as far as staff. It's obviously hard to put a staff number and tie it to number of project areas, but I think if we're looking at the list we have here, I think that would probably put us in the range of 3 to 5 project areas, just throwing a number out there and being able to somewhat speak intelligently about it. And the variable would be that some of these project areas being proposed are TRZs, which the agency may have a lesser role in terms of once we set it up and establish it, we may not be as heavy in terms of the operations of that project area, as those may or may not be more heavily tied to transit and transportation and those departments doing larger share of the work. But if we're looking at project areas of the scope of, you know, Research Park or Brickyard, then those are pretty heavy loads for staff. And ideally the goal is, with our current staff and our current project areas, one thing that we as an agency have not been able to do as much because of the workload is we have not been able to be more of ambassadors towards our project areas and be going out and being more proactive and engaging with the community, property owners, the businesses, and really starting to try to have more of that community input coming through us rather than us just kind of reacting to whatever developers are walking in the door that particular week. So
I appreciate that. Board members, I know we're already very far behind schedule, I think, and we have a very packed council schedule. So what I was thinking, and please let me know if anybody's opposed to this, but What I was thinking is asking and encouraging board members to look at this list that was provided, given some of the answers that Danny just provided as far as what the staff's capacity was, and hopefully in getting more staff, what it may be, to kind of look at this list, ask any questions of this staff offline that we may have, and then put this on a future agenda item, but prepared as a board to say, here are those 3 to 5 that we think are the top priorities. That way, I think it begets a little bit more meaningful conversation at that point. Is the board at all opposed to that idea? Okay, so if that's okay with you, we'll do that. And then, just so we can wrap up, I'm going to quickly move to the final, the number 6, which is the guiding framework and project evaluation process. Thanks, Suze. I don't want to get into this. I simply want to say, yet again, we have to pull this from the agenda, which is the 3rd agenda in a row we've had to pull this from because we keep running out of time. But I would like to do the same thing with this agenda item, is just encourage board members to read through that. If you haven't had a small group meeting with the RDA staff, it's incredibly helpful. Maybe come up with some questions and we'll put it on next month's agenda, and hopefully put it higher up on the list this time so that we can actually get there, because as we saw with the UP loan, the idea behind that guiding framework is really what's pushing some of these other projects, and I think it's such a great thing. But I want to be able to address some of the concerns that were brought up, like Board Member Mendenhall brought up about how are we defining some of these different areas. So perhaps, like I said, if you haven't met with the staff, I would really encourage you to meet with them, look over that, and we'll put it on next week's agenda for a good discussion there, if that's okay with everybody. Whew, all right, let's quickly move on. Report and announcements from the executive director. Nothing over there. Report and announcements from you, Danny.
Just 2 items real fast because they're time sensitive. Number 1, the public outreach component of the public market feasibility study at the Fair Park is underway. There's a link through the RDA website. Results will be posted May 31st. There's an open house on May 16th at the Fair Park. So if you want any more information on that, feel free to reach out, but that is underway. Please encourage people to reach out on that. And then number 2, just mark your calendars. That Monday, June 10th, will mark the 50-year anniversary of the RDA. So we are working towards that. We're putting together...
Are we having a party?
We are trying to do a very fair and equitable and good party. So one that is balanced with celebrating and informative, and is a good use of public funds. So yes.
Will you have a plan for maintenance as part of this?
Yes, we have shifted it to be, our focus is RDA next 50 years of maintenance funding. But no, we will have a publication. We will be doing an event to kind of highlight some of our history and larger projects. We will get you more information on that, but I just wanted to put that on everyone's radar because it's a big deal. So that is all I have, unless there are additional questions for myself or staff.
Okay, anyone? Okay, reports from Chair, Vice Chair. Vice Chair, do you have anything? Do I have anything? I don't think so either. No written briefings. We do have a consent agenda that is to set the date for the budget for the RDA for fiscal year 2019.
So moved.
Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, those debts are set. We do not have a closed session, and yes?
You have to close the public hearing that was delayed earlier.
I think we
close it and then for action.
Okay. I didn't know if those were two unrelated, not to get into business.
With that, we're adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone. And when do you want to come back, Charlie?
10 minutes? Is that enough to switch the system over?
Yep.
Okay.